The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program. We talk to reporters and writers and editors and journalists, and we also talk to authors. And this evening, we have a great show. We have two great people. In our second segment, we have a woman who wrote a book about Co-op City and the history. Here it is, Freedomland and the history of Co-op City. In our first segment, one of my longtime friends in the Bronx, he runs the Latino Sports website and the Latino Sports Ventures, and they write a ton of stuff, and they put out a ton of stuff, and they support Latin ball players. And not only, I'm thinking baseball now, because it's the summertime, but in every sport. My longtime friend, Julio Pabón, nice to have you with us, my friend. Mi amigo.
It's always a pleasure. It was a pleasure talking to you, Gary. You've always been there, whether it's politics, whether it's sports, whether it's whatever. You know, Gary always reaches out, man, to make sure that folks in the Bronx are in the loop on what's really happening.
Well, that was nice of you to say that. But listen, I'm real excited. Julio's talking to us from Dodger Stadium. We're recording this on Monday. It is past. Julio is there. He's going to be there for the Derby and, of course, for the All-Star game, which by the time this airs will have been passed. But what is real exciting is coming up this coming weekend is the Hall of Fame induction, in particular, three Latin ball players, among the greatest of all time. It's been way too long since Minnie Minoso and Tony Oliva were recognized appropriately for all of not only their skills, but their contributions. And Big Papi, David Ortiz is going in. We'll mention, of course, Gil Hodges, Jim Cott, Bud Fowler, and Buck O'Neill will be honored as well. But this is a big weekend for you, and you're bringing people up there, right?
Yes, and unfortunately, I'm here in LA, so I'm not there in the Bronx trying to get people to recognize that there's a bus, because we started this because, you know, first of all, you know, the Hall of Fame is in Copperstown, New York. Some people don't even know what Copperstown is. I never heard of Copperstown until I was like, maybe my son was like 6, 7 years old, and he was in a little league, and I wanted to, you know, like encourage him to baseball. So, you know, I looked at the time. There was no GPS at the time. I had to get one of the old, you know, like gas station maps and look, where is this place, Copperstown, you know? And I said, damn, this is far, you know? So it's really a far drive. It's almost like 3.5, almost 4-hour drive, depending on which way you go, depending on traffic. So it's always a hassle to try to get to the Copperstown. So whenever a Latino got inducted, I felt that there's a lot of people with medium incomes that just didn't, or for the sake of, you know, comfort, didn't want to drive 3.5 hours to go to Copperstown, then drive back. So I thought maybe a bus from the South Bronx would allow people who normally would not want to go to the Hall of Fame because of those inconveniences of the drive or the, you know, the length or whatever, or they didn't have a car, they can come with us. And the first one we went for was when Orlando Cepeda got inducted. Okay, that was the first time, and it was such a success. Orlando saw us. He was very happy.
Really?
Yeah, and then because we actually made some T-shirts, and he said, "You didn't ask me permission to put my face there, so you got to give me at least a dozen of them. You got to give me a dozen of them."
So you did that willingly. But listen, so let's just talk about Minnie Minoso. And I'm going to tell you, as frankly, a Jewish kid who grew up in the Bronx watching baseball, I knew of Minnie Minoso. I was not aware that he was Cuban-born. And Orlando Cepeda, you mentioned him, wrote in his autobiography that Minnie is the one who made it possible for all of us Latins. He was the first Latin player to become a superstar. Just talk about the importance of Minnie Minoso on the heels, frankly, of Jackie Robinson.
Yeah, well, first of all, Minnie Minoso, he's one of the Latin players who's actually black. So he has those two, you know, attributes to himself. Because if he would not speak, you would think he's African American, but he's not. You know, he's Cuban. And the fact that when he came into baseball, and the fact that there were very few Latinos in baseball, he opened up the doors to many, not just because of the fact that he was one of the first, but because he was a hell of a player. And he was also like a good utility player. So he wasn't just used in one position. Minnie was able to play in various positions for the teams that he played for. And he was very well respected. He was a very quiet guy. He wasn't a controversial dude. He was very into the game. And he was like the perfect person to be there at the early periods to open up the doors for all those that followed afterwards. So,
I think
Minnie, he should have been inducted a while back. And I'm glad that the Veterans Committee, got him in there.
I was about to mention that. Let's see. He signed with the Indians just before the 1948 season. Debuted in April of 1949. Played 11 seasons in the American League. Hit better than 308 times. Could you imagine how much money a guy who hits 308 times would be making right now? Was named to 9 All-Star games, 3 Gold Glove awards. I mean, the guy could do it all.
The numbers are there.
And I think he flew under the radar for so many of the players.
Yes.
So that's one guy. Now we're going in chronological order. Let's just I looked up all the stats because they're so great. As
Good
a baseball
for you, and I
fan.
want you to repeat them because I want people who are watching this to understand how great these baseball players were.
Tremendous. And again, compared to what we see now, you're at another level. They didn't get off the field if they got a little cramp in their hamstring. I promise.
And Gary, they didn't have all of the science where these players today,
That's right.
before they get on the field, they have an entire almost breakdown of every pitcher. They know what every quirk of that pitcher is. They know that if the pitcher moves his left shoulder, he might throw a fastball. They know that if he touches his nose, it might be a curveball.
Yeah, of course.
They have all the information.
And then after
those guys didn't have that.
And then after the at bat, they run into the dugout and look at the video of what happened.
Yes,
Anyway, he retired with a .299 career batting average, 2,100 hits, 1,225 runs, 1,000 RBIs, 216 stolen bases. Thank goodness he's an American hero, and he paved the way for others. Now, there's a second Cuban player, Tony Oliva, and I remember as a kid saying, that guy
Minnesota. That's right.
Three of the inductees played for the Twins. Jim Cott, Big Papi, and Tony Oliva had knee problems late in his career. He played 15 seasons, 3 batting titles. Think of if your team, doesn't matter who you root for, the Mets, the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Giants, if your team had a guy who won 3 batting titles, they'd be a Hall of Famer right away.
Right. And he had a sweet swing. I mean, because he was a lean guy, he's not like a big guy like Big Papi, so he was a lean guy. And his swing was like one of these sweet swings that you didn't know where he got his power from. But he was always like, he was almost like a line drive hitter. And his hitting was impeccable.
Part of an integral part of that 1965 World Series team that won 7 games against the Dodgers. Let's see, 1964 Rookie of the Year, 8 All-Star appearances, 304 lifetime average. By the way, if you just tuned in, the reason we're doing this is because Latino Sports is taking a bus from the South Bronx to Cooperstown to make sure that people can do things like celebrate, and Cooperstown's a beautiful town.
We'll give you the details about that afterwards.
Anyway, much more current, Big Papi, David Ortiz. I'm preaching to the choir. 4th Dominican player to be inducted in the Hall of Fame with Pedro Martinez, Vladimir Guerrero, and Juan Marichal. Of course, a winner, a 10-time All-Star, hit .289 in the postseason in 85 games. That's not easy to do. Won the ALCS MVP in 2004, World Series MVP in 2013, was well known for his speech after the Boston Marathon bombing to unite people. Talk about the figure that Big Papi was and is still, obviously.
Well, let me tell you, we've had several events for Big Papi because he won about 4 Latino MVP awards, the most prestigious award given, the oldest Latino award given to Latino baseball players. 32 years we're celebrating this year. Big Papi has won like 4 or 5. And on the last one that we gave him, we had an event for him, a luncheon at Fenway Park. We got the area where they have like we rented this beautiful area that the Fenway Park has to rent, like where you can have luncheons and dinners and stuff. And let me tell you who wanted to show up. We couldn't say no. We had the governor of Massachusetts.
Wow.
We had the mayor of Cambridge, the mayor of Boston. We had the president of the Boston Red Sox. We had the vice president of Boston Red Sox.
This is why I said he was a figure. He was more than just a great player. He was a figure.
He could have run for mayor and probably won in Boston, you know. But the thing about Big Papi is that he's such a humble dude. He's like a big teddy bear, you know. He looks this presence that he has of this big guy. He was so down to earth, man. I mean, I remember one time he was having his early period when in Boston. He was having a problem with the press, and I walked up to him. He didn't know who I was, and I said to him, "Listen, I'm Julio Pabón from Latino Sports," and I just asked him a couple of questions. I said, "By the way, I know you." He didn't want to talk too much to the press. I said, "I know you don't want to talk to the press, but I'm not the typical corporate press. You know, I'm Latino Sports. So I want to talk to you." So he smiled. He gave me an interview, and I said, "By the way, if you want to deal with the press, let me give you these hints." Because I used to do a training.
Oh, I want to hear this too.
To help the players how to deal with the press. And I was told them, look, the press is not your friend and the press is not your enemy. You just got to learn how to deal with them. But you know, one of the things to deal with them is always, you know, you never say no to a report or whatever. They want to talk to you, no problem. That opens up the gate right away because they're not feeling they're chasing you or that you are being
that's right. Or that,
you know.
Julio, before we run out of time, so let's see, you're picking up people at what time? And it's at 150th Street.
It's between 150th, 149th on the Grand Concourse.
Right.
We have a bus. If people are interested, they need to call. They need to send an email to get me so I can reserve the seat. Okay?
We'll put all that stuff on the screen for you.
And you have all the information.
Yeah,
but the fact is that Big Papi, like you were saying, he is incredible. He's paying for Fernando Villalona, which is one of the great stars in the Dominican Republic, to come and perform after the All-Star, the Hall of Fame induction. So there's going to be this humongous party. Wow. The Dominican Republic is doing everything they can to promote this guy. So I think that there's going to be more Dominicans in Cooperstown than the population of Cooperstown.
Then the Bronx got to show up, man. Then it's got to be the people of the Bronx. Listen, before we go, I showed you this before. This is my Jair's familiar jersey. If you hang out with Julio, you can get your favorite players to sign your favorite jerseys because he knows them all. That was when, I guess, 2016, he was honored by Latino Sports. Listen, Julio, you and I, we could talk baseball for a long time.
Yes,
and we only had a few minutes here. But listen, let's get people of the Bronx up there, represent 2 Cubans, 1 Dominican being inducted, along with Gil Hodges.
First time 3 Latinos are being inducted.
Wonderful. And who better to chaperone the people through Cooperstown and give them a chance to see something fantastic than my buddy Julio Pabón.
It's a picnic day. It's a family day. So if you're not into baseball, your wife is not into baseball, but you are, bring a picnic basket, lay on the lawn, watch the thing, and you go have fun. And
in an beautiful upstate New York town.
Oh, yeah.
Julio, thanks so much. Enjoy the Derby. Let's go, Pete Alonso, and enjoy the game. And
always a pleasure.
We'll see you around. Thank you.
God bless. Take care, fellas.
Folks, we'll be right back with more. Okay, welcome back to the Bronx Buzz. Thanks to Julio for joining us all the way from Los Angeles. But now, actually, we're going to go to another place in America. We're going to go to Michigan, to the author of this book. It's called, if you can see it there it is, Freedomland, Co-op City and the Story of New York. It is Annemarie Sammartino. Nice to have you with us, Annemarie.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
As I mentioned to you, Freedomland was something that raised my notice. But the book is not about Freedomland. It's about Co-op City.
Right.
Just talk to us. This is the history. It basically chronicles the first quarter century
That's right.
of Co-op City's existence. But just talk about what your interest was. What was the fascination here to say, I'm going to do all this work?
Sure. So I'll start off just by saying I'm a history professor. My training is actually in German history, but I grew up in Co-op City. And so I guess in a very like facile way, like it was growing up there that made me want to write about it. But really, if you'd asked me when I was growing up, I never would have said I wanted to work on Co-op City. But it was living in Berlin while I was doing dissertation research and research for my first book. You know, I talked to Germans and they'd always ask me where in New York I was from. And I found myself comparing Co-op City a lot to these like housing developments in East Berlin. And then at some point after making that comparison like 1,000 times, I started wondering like, why is it that Co-op City does look like these housing developments in East Berlin? And that prompted me to start researching really the urban planning around Co-op City, really what much of what makes up the first chapter. And I expected there to be a book on Co-op City that I could just
there may be some writing on it, but not on the history of it, not like
right
today.
And there'd been nothing. And so I sort of started doing that research and then wrote a number of sort of bigger, articles for historians, and then just sort of felt like there's more to this story, and there's something I have to say about it, and there's research I want to do about it. And so so then I just sort of kept researching it, from that point. And so really going from that urban planning perspective, as you said, the story really starts in the mid 60s, and then I take it all the way up into the early 1990s.
The thing about it, and if you talk to Bronx historians about Co-op City, and you know where I'm going with this, that it was blamed, if you will, for kind of sucking the life out of places like the Grand Concourse when it was built, because frankly, white people left and populated Co-op City. I'm just fascinated by going through the book and going through what you have written, is that then it was turned around and there was a white flight away from Co-op City. It blew my mind. So I don't know where you want to go here, because I've moved about 20 years of history there. Just talk about the uniqueness, I guess, of Co-op City and who was there, who is there, and what that has contributed to its stability or lack of. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think it's a really important question. I'm glad you brought it up. And it is.
I think it's obvious. You have to bring it up if you're talking about this.
I mean, because it's funny when you talk to people who are not from the Bronx, the first thing they talk about is, oh my God, I've seen Co-op City from the highway. It's so huge, or whatever.
Or from the plane.
Exactly, right. If you land in LaGuardia, you kind of go over it. But people who are from the Bronx, that's exactly the story. Is this one about? So basically, there is some truth to this, right? Co-op City is built, so it's conceived in 1965, 64, 65. Now, the thing to note is actually when it's conceived, it's thought of as an antidote to white flight, because at that point, planners are thinking about, I know, right? I was surprised by this, but what it is that urban planners in the mid 60s are thinking about white flight in municipal terms. They're saying like, look, the point is to keep white people from leaving New York altogether. And it's really, in part, I think, a consequence of what happens in Co-op City, but also more general changes in the way in which cities are thought of in the mid 60s, that really during the planning process, officials stop thinking about white flight in municipal terms. They start thinking about it more in terms of neighborhood, right? And because what they're watching with Co-op City is that disproportionately it was attractive to, in fact, the people it was supposed to be attractive to on some level, right? Working and lower middle class people from the West Bronx. Now, And so it is indeed true that a somewhat shockingly high percentage, I should check the numbers, but
That's okay.
relatively large percentage of the population of the sort of census tracts that make up the concourse area in particular. I mean, this is where my mother's family is from, this area. They moved to Co-op. And indeed, that does contribute somewhat to the destabilization of West
You
Bronx.
just have to excuse me because it is
Sure.
thundering outside my window.
I got it. Yeah.
It's the
Here's
beauty
the
of virtual
people.
television.
Yeah, totally. So what I was saying was that, so it is true to some degree that narrative is right. A lot of white people do, particular Jewish people, leave the concourse to move to Co-op City in the mid to late 60s.
Right.
That said, I want to kind of complicate that narrative a little bit because I want to say two things. One is if you ask the people that move to Co-op, and this is whether they're white or Black or Puerto Rican or whatever, their understanding of why they moved to Co-op is almost always related to their sense that their neighborhood was already getting worse. And one of the weird things about the chronology of Bronx history is you'll see people talk about, well, the real problem was Co-op City, or the real problem was the building of the Cross Bronx Expressway, or the real, you know what I mean? There's all these different.
To be honest, I mean, my response to that is each one of them was a problem.
And so in the case of Co-op City, though, the point I want to make 2 points. One is that the people that are moving to Co-op City from the concourse or whatever, the Jewish people who will ultimately make up the majority of the early population of Co-op City, are not saying anything different about why they're moving to Co-op City than the Black and Hispanic people moving to Co-op. The other thing that's really interesting,
and that is a very fundamental need for affordable, quality housing in a community that is unified and has other activities, etc.
And is safe, right? I mean, in the mid 60s, and late 60s, especially, you're watching crime rise in a lot of neighborhoods where, working lower middle class people are living. They feel like their lives, regardless of what race they are getting less safe. Now, and the other thing I'll say, really,
I just want to move you ahead so we can talk about, because we're going to spend all the time on this.
No, of course.
Get some other things. So go ahead. What is the second part that you want to say?
The other
Say
thing
it quickly.
I was going to say is Co-op City, when people move there, and this I'm going to move to the 80s in a second. When everybody moves to Co-op City in the early 70s, hard to get hard numbers, but we're talking about basically the same racial diversity of the city as a whole, and an enormous amount of enthusiasm in the 60s for living in a racially diverse community. One of the few that sort of seemed stably racially diverse at that time. Then by the time we get to the 80s, this is what you were talking about. We start seeing, really starting in the late 70s, a kind of white flight from Co-op City.
I want to ask you, we're going to run out of time if we.
No, I'm sorry.
This is a whole college lecture it's practically a whole college course. But this I thought was interesting. Was the largest rent strike in history.
Yes.
1975. Talk about that.
Yeah, so the rent strike, it basically, costs in Co-op City go up for residents across the 70s, and it's due to a combination of factors, everything from inflation to corruption. And yes, there's an example of the leader of the rent strike, Charles Rosen, and some of the people that worked with the rent strike was supported in Co-op City by, we don't have hard numbers, but at least 3/4 of the people that live there. And also by, local, New York figures, even national figures on the left, someone like Cesar Chavez, right? So, Telegram in support of the rent strike. And it needs to be, and it's, really in 1975, there are all of these protests in the city against austerity politics. Co-op City in some ways is the most successful of those.
And to me, the thing that really defines it, and in many ways, characterizes Co-op City, that you could get that many people on the same page.
100%.
Because not only, let's see, how many buildings? I got 36 buildings. Is that what
35 buildings.
35 buildings. There we go. 35 towers, 236 townhouses. Hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers have lived there.
Sure.
The fact that you could get that number of people on the same page to do it, and then as a result, they secured basically control of their own property. That is a fundamental thing that, frankly, many housing projects are still working on today.
being a mixed blessing. I mean, one of the things, so the book catalog talks about the rent strike. It talks about in the immediate aftermath of the rent strike, that local control actually is a kind of Pyrrhic victory. It doesn't, they still have to pay this enormous debt. They're still facing the same problems. Costs continue to go up, et cetera. But the other thing I argue is,
so it didn't solve everything that
not
they had
immediately,
wanted.
no.
Right.
But by the late 80s, one of the things I show is that, you know, the state and the city become more accommodationist. They're more willing to work with Co-op City. And part of that, I argue, has to do with the fact that the rent strike kind of put the fear of God in Albany.
And you know, there's great example.
Mhm.
That's a great example to understand how tenant control might work. Of course,
Right.
the size of the population of Co-op City
Mhm.
contributed to it, and what we've already said is getting people on the same page.
Mhm.
So where are we at now? Are you going to go do a book on the next 25 years,
You know,
possibly?
I don't know,
Because this is
honestly.
incredibly well detailed. It's
Oh,
incredibly well researched. And for anybody who lives in Co-op City, who ever lived in Co-op City, or wants to study housing in the
mhm.
Bronx and the city of New York, as it says, it's the story of Co-op City and the story of New York. In many ways,
Mhm.
it is.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you very much. And honestly, I don't know what's next. I've been talking to some people in Co-op City, and I'd like to help, um, you know, Co-op City residents and the community as a whole kind of preserve some of their memories. You know, the book is built on archival sources, but also a lot of interviews with people. And I don't want those all to get lost, not just the work I've done, but the work other people have done there.
Right.
Kind of letting people be aware of the history of their own community. My own research, it's funny. You know, as I said, I'm trained as a German historian. This is a book, obviously, of American history. I'm not sure what the next project is.
All
I
right,
feel like
all right. So
it could be
we
anything. So
won't hold your feet to the fire.
yeah,
Listen,
yeah.
this is an achievement, and
Thank you. I
given
really appreciate
given
it.
the lack of history of so many
Mhm,
aspects of Bronx life, this tells quite a story, and you've done a
mhm.
tremendous job with it, uh, ladies and gentlemen. Freedomland, Co-op City, and the Story of New York, available wherever books are available. And
Mhm,
Annemarie Sammartino, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for bringing us a piece of
mhm,
Bronx history in detail that we never had before.
mhm.
And we hope that you'll leave Michigan behind and come back and find another little
Yes,
neighborhood that you want to write about,
and
much to the chagrin of Oberlin College, where you went.
and I will say I will be back in New York, for a couple of talks in October, at the end of October,
About the book and about this.
about the
Oh,
book.
you
Yeah.
got to let us know when that
And I will
is.
definitely let you know about those and,
Great.
you know, other events that might be coming up
Great.
soon. So
Annemarie Sammartino, thank you so much. We
thank you so
appreciate
much.
your time. And folks, guess what? That means it's the end of the Bronx Buzz. Two great guests, two very interesting segments, and that's how we do it. And guess what? We'll do it again next week. Good night.